She froze the moment he stepped to the counter, not because she recognized the tailored Italian suit or the cold, assessing eyes, but because survival had already taught her what ruthless men could do. Her hands shook violently as she scanned his cigarettes. Too fast, too careful, eyes glued to the register. When their gaze finally met, she flinched. A visceral, full-body flinch. That was the exact second the Mafia boss realized the truth. Her suffocating, paralyzing fear had absolutely nothing to do with him, and everything to do with what would happen after he walked out the door. The convenience store sat on the corner of 8th and Monroe, wedged between a boarded-up laundromat and a check-cashing place fortified with iron bars. Inside, the fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed like trapped insects, casting a sickly, jaundiced glow over aisles of dusty canned goods and stale bread. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. It smelled of cheap floor wax, burnt coffee, and quiet desperation. Gianni DeSantis did not usually buy his own cigarettes. He had a sprawling network of people whose sole purpose was to ensure his humidor was stocked, his espresso machine hummed, and his path remained entirely unobstructed. But tonight, driving back from a tense sit-down in a windowless back room, the claustrophobia of his own empire had driven him to take the wheel himself. He wanted the anonymity of the rain-slicked streets. He wanted a pack of American spirits, light blue. The bell above the glass door chimed, a sharp, cheerful sound that felt entirely out of place in a neighborhood where things usually happened in the dark. Johnny stepped inside, shaking the cold drizzle from his wool overcoat. He was a man carved from marble and hardened by 3 decades of violence, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with a presence that sucked the oxygen out of whatever room he entered. People naturally shrank away from him. It was a reflex. He approached the counter, scanning the rack of cigarettes behind the register. That was when he truly looked at the cashier. She stood perfectly still, her hands pressed flat against the scuffed laminate of the counter, bracing herself as if the floor were about to drop out from beneath her. She was young, mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. Pinned to her oversized polo shirt was a cracked plastic name tag. The name Maya was written on it in fading black marker. The plastic was splintered right down the middle, a jagged line cutting through her name. "Evening," Gianni said, his voice a low, neutral rumble. She jumped. She actually jumped. A sharp intake of air hissing through her teeth as her hand flew to her chest, right over the cracked name tag. "I'm sorry," she blurted out instantly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" "How can I help you?" Johnny's eyes narrowed slightly. He studied her. Her green eyes were bloodshot, ringed with the bruised purple hollows of chronic exhaustion. But it wasn't just tiredness. It was the way she was breathing. Short, shallow, silent breaths through her nose. It was the breathing of prey trying to make itself invisible. "American spirits," Gianni said, keeping his movements slow, deliberate. "Light blue." "Right away." "Yes, sir." She turned too fast, her shoulder clipping the edge of the display rack. As she reached up, the oversized sleeve of her uniform slid down. Just for a fraction of a second, Gianni saw it. A mottled, ugly bruise, blooming yellow and deep purple around her slender wrist, the unmistakable imprint of human fingers. She grabbed the pack, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Gianni knew fear. He traded in it. He knew what it looked like when people were terrified of him. They grew quiet, overly polite, carefully measuring their words so as not to offend the executioner. But Maya wasn't looking at him. Her terrified, dilated eyes were darting everywhere else. To the heavy, steel-reinforced door marked "Employees Only" at the back of the store. To the high-definition security camera mounted directly above the register. And then back to the steel door. 10:47, she whispered, ringing up the cigarettes. Gianni pulled a 20 from his money clip and set it on the counter. As she handed him his change, her freezing fingertips brushed his knuckles. She flinched as if burned. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, retreating a step. For what? Johnny asked quietly. Maya froze. She stared at him as if he had just spoken in tongues. I just... Before she could finish, the heavy steel door at the back of the store groaned open. Maya's entire body went rigid. Her hand instantly flew to the cracked name tag on her chest, a nervous, self-soothing gesture, trying to hold her fractured pieces together. A man stepped out of the shadows. Early 40s, doughy build, wearing a cheap dress shirt stained with sweat. He had small, mean eyes that swept over the store before locking onto Maya. "Everything okay out here?" the man asked. His voice dripped with a false, saccharine cheerfulness that made the hair on the back of Gianni's neck stand up. "Yes, Mr. Patterson," Maya answered far too quickly. "Everything is fine, just helping a customer." Patterson's eyes slid to Gianni. He didn't recognize the Mafia boss. He just saw a tall man in an expensive suit. The cruel glint in Patterson's eyes immediately melted into an obsequious, cowardly smile. "We appreciate your business, sir. Maya here is one of our best." Patterson looked back at Maya. The smile remained, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Customer service is everything, Maya. Remember what we talked about?" "Yes, sir," she whispered, her shoulders hunching inward. "I remember." Johnny didn't say a word. He just stared at Patterson, his gaze so heavy, so devoid of warmth, that the store manager's fake smile began to falter. Patterson cleared his throat, suddenly looking eager to be anywhere else. "I'll be in the office," he muttered, retreating behind the steel door. But he left it open just a crack, just enough to listen. Johnny picked up his cigarettes. He looked at Maya. She was staring blankly at the counter, a single tear threatening to spill over her lower lash line. She looked exactly like someone Johnny had promised to protect a lifetime ago, someone who had died terrified in a dark apartment. Johnny walked out into the rain. He climbed into the driver's seat of his idling Audi, but he didn't put it in drive. He sat in the shadows, watching through the rain-streaked windshield. 5 minutes later, the steel door opened again. A different man stepped out. Younger, wiry, moving with the jerky aggression of an addict. Johnny watched as the man leaned over the counter, his face inches from Maya's. He watched the man's hand shoot out, gripping Maya violently by her bruised wrist. He watched the girl nod frantically, her face pale with absolute terror. In the dark of his car, Johnny's jaw locked. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket and dialed. "Tony," Johnny said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I need you to look into something." For 3 nights, Gianni stayed away. He had learned long ago that patterns in this city made you predictable, and predictability made you dead. His days were consumed by the relentless demands of his empire, a shipment held up at the docks, an ambitious city councilman who needed a quiet reminder of his debts, a sudden friction with the encroaching Lucci family. But the image of the girl in the convenience store, her shallow breathing, her desperate, self-soothing hand hovering over her cracked plastic name tag, refused to dissolve into the noise of his life. On the 4th night, at exactly 11:52 p.m., Gianni found his Audi idling down 8th Street again. The neighborhood was a decaying artery of the city, illuminated only by the sickly orange glow of street lamps and the flickering neon of the quick-stop market. He parked in the shadow of a closed pawn shop across the street. Before stepping out, he took a moment to observe. The first time, he had been a man buying cigarettes. Tonight, he was a predator surveying a hunting ground. The store was a fortress of surveillance. Gianni counted 4 high-definition cameras mounted on the exterior, expensive military-grade hardware that didn't belong on a rundown corner store selling stale chips and lottery tickets. Around the back of the building, parked in the spot marked Manager, sat a beat-up Honda Civic. Not the sleek, out-of-place BMW from the other night. This car belonged to the erratic, wiry man Johnny had seen grabbing Maya's bruised arm. Johnny stepped out into the damp, cold air. The cheerful, incongruous bell chimed as he pushed through the glass door. The store was empty, save for the low hum of refrigerator compressors. And Maya. She stood behind the counter, staring at the middle distance. When she heard the bell, she snapped to attention. Her eyes landed on Gianni, and for a fleeting second, the practiced customer service mask slipped. It wasn't exactly recognition. They had only exchanged a few words, but it was an unmistakable, weary familiarity. She recognized the archetype. The silent, dangerous men who haunted places like this after midnight. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was steadier tonight, rehearsed. Johnny moved toward the coffee station in the corner, his eyes taking in the details. Maya was wearing a long-sleeved turtleneck despite the stuffy heat of the store. Her makeup was thicker tonight, clumsily applied around her left cheekbone, failing to completely mask the yellow-green edge of a fresh contusion. And her name tag, the cracked plastic badge, was pinned precisely over her heart again. "Coffee," he said quietly, picking up a styrofoam cup. The liquid inside looked like sludge, boiling under the heat lamp for hours. "Of course. Help yourself," Maya said. She attempted a smile, but it died somewhere around her mouth. "Cream and sugar are on the counter." Johnny didn't want the coffee. He poured it slowly, using the mundane task to map the interior. The security cameras inside were just as high-end as the ones outside. More interestingly, they were all angled toward the register, the front door, and the aisles. Not a single lens pointed toward the heavy steel door marked "Employees Only" at the back. It was a deliberate blind spot. He stirred the black sludge and walked back to the counter. Maya was furiously typing something into the register, her shoulders hitched up to her ears. When he approached, she immediately stopped, her hand flying up to smooth her hair. A preemptive grooming gesture Johnny had seen 1,000 times in his clubs. It was the desperate attempt to make oneself presentable for someone whose anger had brutal consequences. "Just the coffee?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. "And these," Johnny said, grabbing a random pack of mints from the display. She rang it up. Her hands were steadier than the first night, but her eyes kept darting to the digital clock on the register display. It read 11:58 p.m. "375, she whispered. Johnny pulled a $5 bill from his money clip and set it down. "Keep the change." "Oh, I can't," she blurted out, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Thank you. That's very kind, but—" She didn't put the money in the tip jar. She carefully folded the dollar bills and slipped them silently into the front pocket of her jeans, glancing nervously toward the steel door as she did. The door was closed, but a sliver of yellow light bled out from underneath it. "Busy night?" Johnny asked, his voice low, inviting conversation. Maya's eyes widened slightly. She wasn't used to customers lingering. "Not really. It's usually pretty quiet after midnight until the bars close around 2. She paused, wringing her hands together. "You work late?" "I keep irregular hours," Johnny said. "Me too," he added, holding her gaze. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before vanishing. "Irregular is one way to put it. How long have you worked here?" The question caught her off guard. 8 months, almost 9 now." "Long shifts?" "Yeah." She looked down at the counter, her fingers tracing the crack in her name tag. "The money's okay, though. Better than most places." It was a lie. Gianni could hear the hollow tremor in her voice. Whatever this grim corner store paid her, it wasn't worth 10-hour night shifts under the watchful eyes of expensive cameras and violent men. "You from around here?" he asked, taking a sip of the terrible coffee. Suspicion finally crept into her green eyes. She looked at him fully now. "Why?" "Just making conversation. I'm not in a hurry." The suspicion deepened into a guarded wariness. "Most people are, after midnight." "I'm not most people." Something shifted in Maya's expression. It was the moment of realization, the animal instinct that recognized a predator. Gianni kept his posture relaxed, his hands visible, completely devoid of threat. But the capacity for violence, even when perfectly controlled, left a psychic signature. She felt it. "No," she said very quietly. "I guess you're not." The store fell completely silent, save for the buzzing lights overhead. Johnny looked at her face. He looked at the heavy makeup caked over the swelling on her cheek. "I should let you get back to work," he said finally, turning toward the door. Relief instantly flooded her posture. "Okay, thank you for stopping in." Johnny took 3 steps toward the exit, then stopped. He didn't turn around. His voice dropped an octave, cutting through the hum of the refrigerators like a blade. "That bruise on your cheek," he said softly. "The one you're covering with makeup. How'd you get it?" The silence that rushed into the space between them was absolute. When Gianni slowly turned back around, Maya was staring at him. Her face was bloodless. Her eyes were wide pools of sheer, naked terror. It was the look of someone who had spent a lifetime making themselves small, only to realize a spotlight had just been turned directly on them. "I walked into a door," she said automatically, a robotic, rehearsed response. "No, you didn't," Gianni said. "I'm clumsy." "No, you're not." Tears sprang to her eyes, thick and fast, but she blinked them back furiously, shaking her head. "Please," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, you have to go." "Who did it?" Gianni asked, taking one slow step back toward the counter. "Nobody. It was an accident." Her hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. "Please, mister, you have to go right now." Before Gianni could speak again, the steel door at the back of the store slammed open. The wiry man from the other night, Derek, emerged. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw grinding rhythmically. He moved with the aggressive, unpredictable energy of a speed freak. He looked at Maya, taking in her tear-streaked face, and his expression instantly darkened into pure malice. He turned his dead eyes onto Gianni. "Problem here?" Derek barked, stepping out from behind the counter, his hand dropping subtly toward the waistband of his jeans. "No problem," Maya blurted instantly, swiping furiously at her wet cheeks. "Customer just needed help." Derek didn't look at her. His dead, glassy eyes stayed fixed on Gianni. He closed the distance between them, stopping just 3 feet away, close enough for Gianni to smell the stale beer and cheap adrenaline rolling off him. Beneath the hem of Derek's faded flannel shirt, Gianni clearly saw the heavy bulge of a firearm tucked into his waistband. A 9mm, poorly concealed. "Looked like more than that," Derek growled, his hand resting casually near the grip of the gun. "You again. Thought I told you to find another store." Gianni took a slow sip of the terrible coffee. He didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He simply looked at the man like he was a minor stain on a very expensive rug. "This one's convenient," Derek snorted, a harsh, ugly sound. "Yeah, well, convenience ain't worth the hassle, pal. So maybe you should inconvenience yourself somewhere else." In any other context, in any other room in the city, the situation would have ended right there. Johnny carried a custom .45 in a shoulder holster under his suit jacket, an extension of his own violent history. He could have drawn it, put a hollow point through Derek's kneecap, and explained the exact hierarchy of power that governed the streets outside this miserable little box. He could have made the man swallow his own teeth, but Gianni caught movement in his peripheral vision. Maya was staring at him. Her face was chalk white, her eyes stretched wide in a silent, desperate plea. She wasn't terrified that Derek was going to shoot the stranger in the expensive suit. She was terrified that the stranger was going to hurt Derek, and that she would be the one to pay the blood price the moment the door closed behind him. Gianni's jaw tightened. He held Derek's gaze for 3 long seconds, long enough to ensure the punk felt the cold, abyssal drop of real danger, before he gave a slow, measured nod. "Have a good night," Gianni said softly. He didn't say it to Derek. He walked to the glass door and pushed it open, the cheerful bell chiming its mocking tune into the wet night. But he didn't leave immediately, standing in the cold drizzle next to his Audi. Gianni turned his collar up against the wind, and watched through the grime-streaked window. Inside, Derek whirled on Maya. The fake bravado vanished, replaced by the vicious cruelty of a man who only felt big when someone else was small. He grabbed Maya by the upper arm, exactly where the yellowing bruise blossomed beneath her sleeve, and yanked her violently toward him. Gianni couldn't hear the words, but he saw the shape of them. Short, sharp, venomous. Maya didn't fight back. She shrank. Her head bowed, her shoulders curled inward, nodding repeatedly in a frantic attempt to placate him. She was a bird caught in a snare, too exhausted to even flutter her wings. Derek shoved her backward, hard enough that she stumbled into the cigarette display and stalked back through the steel door. It slammed shut with a heavy, metallic thud that Gianni felt in the soles of his shoes. Maya stood alone behind the register, shaking uncontrollably. She pressed her hand over her bruised arm, gasping for air. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and looked out the window. Through the rain and the neon glare, her eyes found Gianni standing by his car. For one suspended second, the distance between them collapsed. Gianni saw the question burning in her gaze. Why did you ask? Why do you care? But beneath the terror and the confusion, Gianni saw something infinitely more fragile. A tiny, dangerous ember of hope. The hope that, after months of drowning in plain sight, someone had finally seen her go under. Gianni broke the stare. He slid into his car, the heavy thunk of the door shutting out the rain. He sat in the profound silence of the leather interior, the engine purring softly beneath him. He picked up his phone. "Tony," Gianni said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Boss, talk to me." "Change of plans," Gianni ordered. "I need to know everything about a man named Derek Simmons and another guy named Aaron Chen. I want to know where they sleep, where they eat, who they owe money to, and who they work for. Everything. Tear their lives down to the studs." Tony hesitated, the sound of papers shuffling over the line. "When do you need it?" "Yesterday." "Boss," Tony said slowly, the caution clear in his voice. "What exactly are we planning here? We've got the Lucci family pushing into the south side. We've got shipments." Gianni watched Maya through the rain-streaked window. She had moved to the coffee station, furiously wiping the counter, her shoulders still shaking. "I'm planning to remind some people," Gianni said quietly, "that fear only works if the person you're scaring doesn't have anyone scarier standing behind them." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. He sat there in the dark, watching, always watching. It was what apex predators did. They studied their prey, learned their routines, mapped their weaknesses. When the moment was right, they struck with overwhelming force. But Gianni wasn't hunting Maya. He was hunting the men who had turned her into prey, and they had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them in the dark. The information Tony delivered 3 days later painted a picture that was both clearer and uglier than Gianni had anticipated. They met in the back room of Rossini's, Gianni's flagship restaurant in the heart of Little Italy. The lighting was low, the air smelled of rich espresso and garlic, and the thick, soundproofed walls ensured conversations remained private. Tony spread out a dense mosaic of files, surveillance photos, and financial documents across the mahogany table, the careful archaeology of other people's secrets. "Derek Simmons," Tony began, tapping a police report with a thick finger. 3 assault charges, 2 convictions, did 18 months in Rikers for beating a woman so badly she needed reconstructive surgery, got out 2 years ago, violated parole twice, somehow never went back inside. "Someone protected him," Gianni said, his voice flat, his dark eyes locked on the glossy mugshot of Derek's sneering face. "Yeah, a guy named Vincent Patterson. Filed paperwork saying Derek was employed full-time as a night manager at his convenience store, providing a stable residence. The parole board bought it." Tony pulled out a thick ledger, dense with columns of numbers. "But here's the thing, boss. Derek isn't just Patterson's cousin. He's his enforcer. When Patterson needs a message sent, Derek does the sending." Johnny leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a single finger around the rim of his espresso cup. "And Maya?" Tony shifted uncomfortably, pulling out a series of surveillance photos. She's leverage, and she's not the only one. He slid the photos across the table. They showed Maya and two other young women, similarly exhausted, similarly bruised, getting into a nondescript black sedan after their night shifts. I tracked her routine, Tony explained, his voice grim. She doesn't just work at the quick stop. Every Monday and Thursday, that car picks her up after her shift, takes her to an unmarked apartment building in Astoria. She goes in for about 40 minutes. She comes out looking worse than when she went in. Gianni's jaw tightened. What's in the apartment? Patterson's main operation. That's where they cut and package. Tony paused, letting the weight of the words settle. The quick stop is just a front, a drop point, and Astoria is where they keep the girls. Girls, Gianni repeated softly. The word felt like ash in his mouth. 3 of them, as far as I can tell. All working at Patterson's various low-income stores. All trapped the exact same way. Someone they love is being held over their head. Tony tapped another document. Patterson finds people who are desperate, vulnerable. He hooks them in, makes them complicit in cutting his product so they can't go to the cops, and uses their own love against them. Derek keeps them in line with his fists, and the fear of what happens to their families if they talk keeps them silent. Gianni stood up and paced slowly to the heavy, velvet-draped window. Outside, the city pulsed with life. People walking home, oblivious to the violence humming just beneath the pavement. His organization maintained order. They bled, they intimidated, they controlled. But there were lines even criminals didn't cross. "What about Aaron Chen?" Gianni asked, turning back to the table. Tony's expression tightened in pure disgust. "Aaron is a special piece of work. Started dating Maya a year ago." Seemed normal at first. Then she started working for Patterson, started sending $400 a month home to upstate New York to a woman named Rosalie Reyes. "Her mother," Gianni said, remembering the crack in Maya's voice when he had guessed. "Yeah, Rosalie's been in and out of hospitals. Stage 3 cancer, medical bills up to her eyeballs," Tony confirmed. "Aaron saw an opportunity. He's in deep with bookies, owes about 30 grand. So he's been beating Maya, taking her money, and threatening to tell Patterson she's stealing if she doesn't comply. Threatens to cut off her mother's lifeline. Threatens to hurt her mother directly. He's using her the same way Patterson is." "Exactly. And here's the kicker, boss." Tony pulled out the final document, a wiretap transcript. "Aaron's connected to the Lucci family. Not a made man. Just an errand boy. But it means Patterson's entire operation is likely funded by the Luccis. They've been looking for a back door into our territory for months." Gianni absorbed this. The pieces locked together with a sickening click. The Lucci family, Patterson, Derek, Aaron, all of them circling around Maya and girls like her, feeding on their desperation, growing fat on their fear. It was a perfect, vicious cycle of exploitation. "Options," Gianni commanded softly, sitting back down. "Legal?" Tony offered. "Drop a dime. Let the cops raid the Astoria operation, but that means Maya and the other girls get arrested too. They're caught holding the bag. Even if they cut deals, their lives are ruined, and Patterson will make bail before dinner and come after them." "Illegal," Gianni countered, his voice colder than ice. "We move on the operation directly, take out Derek and Patterson, burn the Astoria spot to the ground, sever the Lucci connection." Tony met Gianni's eyes. "But that means open war with the Luccis, and war is loud. War is expensive." Gianni stared at the photo of Maya walking out of the Astoria building, clutching her stomach, her face buried in the collar of her jacket. "Third option," Gianni said. Tony smiled grimly. "You already know. Say it anyway." "We make Vincent Patterson an offer he can't refuse," Gianni said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "We convince him that his operation is suddenly a fatal liability. We convince the Luccis that this territory is closed permanently. We convince Aaron Chen that Maya is radioactive." Tony leaned forward. "And we do it all without anyone knowing you were involved." Gianni nodded slowly. It was risky. It required absolute precision. But it was the only way to surgically remove the cancer without killing the patient. "Set it up," Johnny ordered, picking up Patterson's file. "I want to talk to him first, alone." Vincent Patterson was not a stupid man. He had built his operation carefully over 10 years, starting with a single convenience store and expanding slowly, methodically, staying under the radar. He knew exactly how much pressure he could apply to desperate people before they broke in ways that attracted police attention. But he had never learned what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that pressure. Not until his phone rang at 3 a.m., 3 days after Gianni's last visit to the Quick Stop. It was an unknown number. Patterson almost let it go to voicemail, but a cold prickle of instinct made him answer. "Vincent Patterson," he grunted, rubbing the sleep from his eyes in his dimly lit bedroom. "You don't know me," said a voice on the other end. It was calm, measured, and terrifyingly deep. "But I know you." Patterson sat straight up in bed, the sheets pooling at his waist. "Who the hell is this?" "Someone who has been watching your operation," the voice continued, smooth as polished stone. "The Quick Stop on 8th, the Astoria apartment, the girls you use as mules, the connection to the Lucci family." A pause stretched over the line. Fear, cold and sharp as a scalpel, slid down Patterson's spine. "I don't know what you're talking about," Patterson stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Yes, you do," the voice said gently. "And you're going to listen very carefully, Vincent, because I am only going to say this once." Gianni sat in his dark office above Rossini's, staring out at the empty streets, the phone pressed to his ear. "In approximately 6 hours," Gianni continued, "you're going to receive a visit from someone representing my interests. You're going to sit down with this person, you're going to listen to what they have to say, and then you're going to make a choice." "A choice about what?" Patterson asked, his mouth suddenly dry as dust. "About whether you want to keep your operation or keep your life." Patterson swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. "Are you threatening me? Do you have any idea who I work with?" "I am informing you," Gianni corrected, his tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "There is a significant difference. The Lucci family doesn't own this territory. They never will. And your operation, using vulnerable women, taking advantage of their desperation to clean your money, that ends today." "You can't just—" "I can, and I will," Gianni interrupted effortlessly. "The only question is whether you cooperate or whether I have to make you cooperate. Cooperation is cleaner. It's better for everyone involved." Patterson gripped the phone, his knuckles turning white. "And if I refuse? Then Derek Simmons will be arrested tomorrow for violating his parole. The evidence will be airtight," Gianni said, reciting the plan Tony had meticulously prepared. "While he's inside, certain people will be informed that he's been talking to federal investigators about the Lucci family's operations. Within a week, he'll be dead." Patterson's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You'll also receive a visit from the IRS," Gianni went on smoothly. "Turns out, laundering drug money through a chain of failing convenience stores creates a very clear paper trail when someone knows exactly where to point the dogs. You'll be charged with tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering. You will lose everything." "This is insane," Patterson gasped. "The girls you're using," Gianni said, his voice tightening ever so slightly. "Maya Reyes, Jennifer Sullivan, Kesha Davis. They will be offered protection and full immunity in exchange for their testimony against you. They will take it, and they will bury you under the jail." Patterson was visibly shaking now, pacing the length of his bedroom. "Who the fuck are you?" "I am the person giving you a way out," Gianni replied, checking his gold Swiss watch. "My representative will arrive at your office at 9 a.m. sharp. You will listen to his offer, and you will accept it. And if I don't? Then by this time tomorrow," Gianni said softly, "you will be in a cell. Derek will be marked for death, and the Luccis will be actively looking for the man who burned their distribution network." Gianni paused, letting the silence magnify the terror. "Choose wisely, Mr. Patterson." The line went dead. Patterson stood frozen in the darkness of his bedroom, the dial tone buzzing in his ear. He had built his entire miserable empire on fear. He understood that people would do almost anything to protect the ones they loved, and he had exploited that desperate love until there was nothing left but compliance. But now, someone was using those exact same tactics against him. And whoever it was, they were playing a game Patterson couldn't even comprehend. At exactly 9 a.m., Tony walked into the cramped, windowless office at the back of the Quick Stop. Patterson was already sitting behind his cluttered desk, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His hands trembled violently as he poured himself a cup of coffee from a machine that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. "Vincent Patterson?" Tony asked, his voice deliberately flat, though he knew perfectly well who the sweating man was. "Who wants to know?" Patterson snapped, attempting bravado that completely failed. Tony closed the heavy steel door behind him. He didn't lock it. He didn't need to. He pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it onto Patterson's desk with a heavy, authoritative thud. He sat down without being invited. "I represent certain interests in this city," Tony said, his dark eyes locking onto Patterson's trembling hands. "Interests that have become deeply concerned about your operation." Patterson swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the folder. I don't know what you're talking about." Tony sighed, leaning forward. "Yes, you do. So let's skip the pathetic denial and get straight to the negotiation." He flipped the folder open, spreading a series of legal documents across the scarred desktop. "This is what's going to happen today." Patterson stared at the papers, his bloodshot eyes unable to focus on the dense legal jargon. "You're going to sell all 5 of your stores," Tony stated, his voice stripped of all warmth. "The buyers are already lined up. Legitimate businesses, fair market value, clean transaction. The money will go into an offshore account I've already set up for you." "Why the hell would I do that?" Patterson demanded, his voice cracking on the last word. "Because the alternative is everything I outlined on the phone last night," Tony replied smoothly, perfectly matching the cadence Johnny had used. "Within 1 hour of this meeting, if you haven't signed, Derek gets arrested. The IRS gets an anonymous, heavily documented tip. The Luchas get informed that you've been skimming their product, and the girls get witness protection offers they won't refuse." Patterson's face went the color of old cement. "This is extortion." "No," Tony corrected, a cold smile touching his lips. "This is business. Extortion would be if I was taking something from you without compensation. I'm giving you an exit strategy. You walk away clean with enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere very far from here." "And the girls?" Patterson choked out, his eyes darting frantically. "The girls are no longer your concern," Tony said, his voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "Here's what happens to them. They quit, effective immediately. Any debt they think they owe you is forgiven in full. Any threats made against their families are permanently voided. They walk away, and you never, ever contact them again." Patterson collapsed back into his cheap office chair, the air rushing out of him. "The Luchas will never allow this. They'll kill me." "The Luchas have already been informed that this territory is closed to them permanently." Tony lied seamlessly, projecting absolute authority. "They understand the situation. Who the fuck are you people?" Patterson breathed, genuine terror finally breaking through his greasy facade. Tony smiled thinly, sliding a sleek black pen across the desk. "We're the people who own the city, Vincent. We just don't like advertising it." He tapped the stack of papers. "You have 30 minutes to decide. Sign these documents, agree to the terms, and by close of business today, you'll have $1.2 million in your account. Refuse, and by this time tomorrow, you'll have absolutely nothing." Patterson stared at the documents. His hands were shaking so violently now that he could barely pick up the pen. "What about Derek?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Derek gets put on a bus to Florida tonight with $10,000 and a very clear warning," Tony replied. "If he ever comes back to this city, if he ever contacts Maya or any of the other girls, he disappears. Permanently." "And Aaron Chen?" "Aaron," Tony said, his eyes narrowing, "is being handled separately." Patterson picked up the pen. He put it down. He picked it up again. "If I do this," he whispered, staring blindly at the first signature line, "I want absolute protection. From the Luchas, from whoever you work for. From all of it." "You'll have it," Tony promised, "as long as you leave and never come back." Patterson signed. His hand shook the entire time, scratching his name across every document. The sales agreement, the release forms, the ironclad non-disclosure agreement that threatened consequences so severe, Tony didn't even need to explain them out loud. When it was done, Tony methodically gathered the papers, slipping them back into the manila folder. "You made the right choice," Tony said, standing up. Patterson looked up, his eyes hollow, stripped of all the cruel power he had wielded for a decade. "Did I? I spent 10 years building this." "You spent 10 years hurting desperate people," Tony corrected sharply. "This is you paying for it with money instead of blood. Trust me, Mr. Patterson, you got the better deal." Tony turned and walked out of the cramped office. As he passed through the quick stop for the last time, he saw Maya at the register, ringing up a customer. She glanced up, her tired green eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second, before she quickly looked away, retreating back into her shell. She didn't know yet, but she would. Aaron Chen was much easier. He didn't require paperwork or offshore accounts. He just required terror. He was leaving his legitimate warehouse job at 5 p.m. the next day, the sky already bruised purple with twilight, when a black Audi sedan pulled up silently beside him. It was the kind of car that immediately signaled trouble in his neighborhood. 2 men stepped out, large men, moving with terrifying efficiency. Aaron immediately recognized the danger. He dropped his duffel bag and tried to run. He made it exactly 10 feet before the larger man caught him, slamming him face first against the rough brick wall of the alley with enough force to knock the air completely from his lungs. "Aaron Chen," the man stated. It wasn't a question. Aaron couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. He could only nod frantically against the brick. "You know a girl named Maya Reyes," the second man said, stepping closer, his voice dangerously soft. Another frantic nod. "You've been hitting her, taking her money, threatening her sick mother." I don't. She," Aaron gasped, his cheek scraping against the wall. The larger man's hand closed around the back of Aaron's neck, not tight enough to choke him, but tight enough to make him explicitly understand how easily his spine could be snapped. "Here's what's going to happen, Aaron," the second man said calmly. "You're going to leave Maya alone, forever. You are never going to call her, text her, see her, or even think about her. You are going to forget she exists." "Okay," Aaron choked out, tears of genuine panic springing to his eyes. "Okay, I will, I promise." "I'm not done." The grip on his neck tightened painfully. "Your gambling debt? The $30,000 you owe the books? It's paid. You have a clean slate. But if you gamble again, if you borrow money again, if you ever get into debt again, you don't get another bailout. You get buried. Understood?" Yes, I understand." "And if you ever go near Maya or her mother again," the man leaned in, his breath hot against Aaron's ear. "If you ever threaten her again, if you ever even say her name out loud, they will find pieces of you in 3 different states. Are we clear?" "We're clear. I swear to God." Aaron sobbed, his bravado entirely shattered. The large man suddenly released him. Aaron slumped against the brick wall, gasping for air, clutching his chest. "One more thing," the second man said, adjusting his suit jacket. "This conversation never happened. You never saw us. You don't know why you're leaving Maya alone. You just are. Because if you talk about this, if you tell anyone about this alley, we will know, and we will come back, and next time, we won't be this nice." The 2 men got back into the black Audi and drove away, leaving Aaron alone in the alley, shaking violently, finally understanding what it felt like to be utterly powerless against forces he couldn't see and couldn't fight. He never contacted Maya again. Johnny returned to the quick stop one final time. It was exactly 11:30 p.m., 5 days after Tony's decisive visit to Patterson's cramped office. The air outside smelled of ozone and impending snow, A sharp, clean cold that cut through the grime of the city block. The new owner, a legitimate businessman who ran a chain of successful, well-lit bodegas and had absolutely no idea who had orchestrated the fire sale of Patterson's empire, was already implementing sweeping changes. The harsh fluorescent buzzing was gone, replaced by warmer, brighter lighting. The aisles were being restocked with fresh produce instead of dusty cans. The heavy steel door at the back was propped wide open, revealing a freshly painted office, completely devoid of secrets. But tonight, Maya was still working. It was her last scheduled night shift before the transition to better pay, reasonable daylight hours, and actual, uniformed security. She stood behind the counter, the cracked plastic name tag still pinned over her heart. But when the cheerful bell chimed and Gianni stepped through the glass door, something fundamental had shifted in her posture. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She looked up, her green eyes finding his, and instead of naked terror, Gianni saw a profound, overwhelming confusion. "You," she breathed, her hands resting flat on the counter. "Me," Gianni said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He didn't approach the coffee station tonight. He walked directly to the register, stopping just a few feet away. He looked at her face. The heavy makeup was gone. The yellowing bruise on her cheek was fading, a pale echo of violence that would soon disappear completely. "Patterson's gone," Maya said, her voice trembling, but not from fear. "Derek's gone." She swallowed hard, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the counter. Aaron called me yesterday. He was crying. He told me he was sorry, that we were completely done, and that I should have a good life. And then he hung up." Gianni remained perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on hers. He said nothing. "The new owner offered me a different position," Maya continued, her breath hitching, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Day shift, better pay, normal hours. He said all my previous debts to the store were wiped clean in the sale." She took a hesitant step out from behind the register, closing the distance between them until only the narrow counter separated them. "How is any of this possible?" she whispered, searching his face. "Sometimes things change," Gianni said simply, his tone gentle, betraying none of the ruthless violence it took to orchestrate that change. "Things don't just change," Maya countered, a sudden, desperate intensity flaring in her eyes. "Not like this. Not overnight. Not for people like me." She took another step closer, leaning over the counter. "What did you do?" "I reminded some people that there are consequences for their actions," Gianni replied. Maya stared at him, the pieces rapidly locking together in her mind. The stranger in the expensive suit, the quiet questions, the sudden, absolute disappearance of the monsters who had held her captive. "You're the one who called Patterson," she stated, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the one who sent those men to Aaron." It wasn't a question anymore. Thank you for watching. The Mafia boss noticed the cashier was terrified. What he found out changed everything. If this story of unexpected redemption and the power of noticing the invisible moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more intense, emotionally driven stories. We believe that even in the darkest corners, a single act of profound empathy can break the cycle of violence. Have you ever experienced a moment where a stranger changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss our next upload.